In Chapter 1, Marlowe wakes from a fugue state after being revived aboard the Pharaoh following 6 years in stasis. Dr. Okoyo confirms his health is stable, but Marlowe struggles to recall recent events, including a mission to find Vargassos. He meets Basanderlin, who is distrustful of their operation, but Marlowe insists on leading a mission to find Samir, a key figure linked to the Painted Man. As Marlowe prepares to leave the ship, he reflects on past events, including the destruction of an imperial colony on Rustum and the ongoing threat posed by the Cielcin. In Chapter 2, Hadrian reflects on the sterile environment where the Cielcin survivors are kept in suspended animation. He talks with Valka, who is frustrated by the lack of progress, but Hadrian shares a lead about Krim's discovery of someone who may guide them to the extrasolarians. After discussing their past, they are interrupted by Captain Jinan Azar, who shares a quiet moment with Hadrian. Jinan reassures him, and they discuss their difficult mission. The chapter ends with Hadrian experiencing a painful migraine after waking from fugue, as he grapples with his doubts and the weight of his responsibilities. In Chapter 3, the group arrives in the sunken city of Arslan, navigating through its chaotic streets toward a meeting with Samir, a survivor involved with the Painted Man. Samir warns them of the danger surrounding arms deals, particularly atomics, due to the watchful eyes of the Empire's Black Priests. He explains the precarious power of the Chantry and other factions, including Jive's leadership. Despite tense interactions, Samir agrees to take them to the Painted Man, intrigued by Marlowe's background. The chapter highlights Marlowe's growing conflict with Samir's predatory nature and his own connection to the Empire. In Chapter 4, Hadrian Marlowe meets the Painted Man, an unsettling extrasolarian arms dealer, in a tea house rather than a typical hideout. The Painted Man's appearance is grotesque and inhuman, causing Hadrian and his crew to feel intense unease. The Painted Man claims to be a businessman, dealing in weapons, including atomics, and hints at other illicit trades. Hadrian seeks information about Vargassos, a mysterious planet, but the Painted Man is evasive, claiming no hierarchy exists among his kind. Despite Hadrian's persistence, he leaves the meeting empty-handed, the Painted Man having dismissed him with mockery and contempt. In Chapter 5, Had and his team battle a group of machine-augmented humans, or daemons, but realize they're being led into a trap by the Painted Man. Despite using his high matter sword to fight off enemies, Had is forced to retreat. As the team struggles to hold their ground, Had is distracted when one of his soldiers is killed. They find Gen injured, and Had is confronted by the Painted Man, who mocks their efforts. As Had's perception begins to warp, he realizes that one of his own, the second Peltist, is actually the Painted Man in disguise. In Chapter 6, Carl wakes up in an unfamiliar office, stunned and unable to move properly. He finds himself captive to a homunculus called the Painted Man, who mocks Carl's situation and reveals that Carl's friends are likely dead. The Painted Man hints at ransom, then taunts Carl with the sword he took from him, which he believes is from a sacred order. Carl, regaining strength, confronts the homunculus and demands answers about Vargassos, sensing the creature's connection to it. After an intense exchange, Carl finally overpowers the Painted Man, kills it, and escapes through the office's door into a bustling street. In Chapter 7, Marlowe reflects on his current state after losing his terminal and being unable to contact his fleet. He's burdened with regret and grief, recalling past lessons and the faces of those he's lost. After a brief interaction with Jinan, he learns that the rest of the crew is safe, though they didn't retrieve Gen's body. Marlowe struggles with his emotions, but finds some comfort in Jinan's presence. They share a quiet, tender moment together, though the harsh realities of their world remain ever present. As they walk through the city, Marlowe's thoughts linger on loss and the uncertainty of their future. In Chapter 8, Bassander criticizes the failed mission on Rustum, and tensions rise as the captains debate their next move. Ottavia refuses to risk her ship, while Bassander insists on returning to the front. Hadrian reveals the Painted Man's terminal, suggesting it might hold key information to end the war. The captains remain divided, with Jinan reluctantly agreeing to wait for orders. Hadrian argues for action, believing they have a unique opportunity to end the conflict. After the meeting, Hadrian confronts Jinan, frustrated by her alignment with Bassander. They discuss their conflicting priorities, but Hadrian's resolve remains to find peace rather than continue the war. In Chapter 9, Hadrian reflects on Gen's death, struggling with guilt over not saving him. He shares a meal with his crew aboard the Balmung, where they bond over stories of Gen. Hadrian masks his grief, pretending it's not his fault, but Switch reassures him. They laugh at memories of Gen's antics, finding solace in recalling his life instead of focusing on his death. The chapter highlights Hadrian's complex emotions and the crew's camaraderie as they navigate their losses. The empty chair at their table symbolizes Gen's absence, but his memory remains alive among them. In Chapter 10, Hadrian and Jinan have a tense conversation about their mission and the ongoing war. Hadrian expresses his frustration with Basander and his desire for peace, while Jinan reminds him of the harsh realities of war and duty. Hadrian reflects on his own past and motivations, struggling with the fear of losing Jinan and his belief in a future without endless fighting. Despite their differences, they share an intimate moment, but the weight of their respective roles and the conflict they face hangs heavily between them. They acknowledge the uncertainty of their future together, aware that their love may not survive the pressures of the war. In Chapter 11, Had delays his visit to the Mistral after learning Saran has been revived from fugue. He struggles with grief over Gen's death and his uncertain relationship with Jinan. On board the Mistral, he reflects on the Empire's control and considers defecting. He speaks with Switch, who offers support, and eventually meets Saran, who has mourned Gen in her way. They share an emotional moment, with Saran expressing gratitude for Gen's avenging. The group discusses their next moves, including potential orders from the Imperial fleet and the situation with Jinan, while Had considers reaching out to Rain Smythe for a solution. In Chapter 12, Hadrian Marlowe confronts Commodore Basander about their mission to locate Vorgassos, arguing that the intelligence they've gathered from the Painted Man's terminal can lead them to March Station. Basander dismisses the lead and insists they return to the fleet. Marlowe refuses, claiming they must continue the search to potentially alter the course of the war. Tensions escalate as Marlowe demands control of the prisoners and the Balmung, but Basander refuses. Eventually, Captain Jinan sides with Basander, agreeing to return to the fleet. Marlowe, distraught, realizes their mission is likely over, and the fate of the mission hinges on the choices they make next. In Chapter 13, Hadrian reflects on his motivations for defying orders and the complex nature of obedience. He contemplates the risks of disobedience, remembering his past with the Chantry and the consequences of his actions. He has a talent for negotiating with enemies, and he's attempting to use it again, though the stakes are high. Rain Smythe offers him a chance at defiance, but she cannot protect him if he disobeys. Hadrian recalls lessons from his past, grappling with the question of what drives him and the nature of obedience, whether out of fear, loyalty, or compassion, ultimately questioning what he must follow in his current situation. In Chapter 14, Hadrian attempts to secure a ship and a crew to infiltrate the Balmung and extract a fugue unit. He approaches Captain Ottavia Corvo, requesting her help, despite knowing she doesn't owe him anything. After a tense negotiation, Ottavia agrees to help, though not without reservations, especially regarding the risks and the Cielcin. Valka, who had planned to leave, decides to assist with the mission, offering her expertise with the cameras and her connection to the Cielcin. Hadrian finalizes the plan, setting the stage for a daring operation against the Empire's forces. In Chapter 15, after landing, Lord Marlowe meets with Switch and Dr. Okoyo in the busy cargo bay. They arrange the loading of crates and other supplies, preparing to depart. Marlowe, anxious and mindful of their mission, reflects on the tension in the air as they move through the ship. They encounter Basander, who is overseeing the Norman shuttle's departure. Marlowe has a tense conversation with him, discussing the separation of their forces. He also shares a final, bittersweet moment with Jinan, bidding her farewell despite their lingering feelings. As he leaves, he feels conflicted about his actions and their consequences. In Chapter 16, Hadrian and his team are preparing to revive Tanarin, a Cielcin Xenobite, from cryogenic stasis. Despite uncertainty about the procedure's success, they proceed cautiously, with Dr. Okoyo managing the complex process. When Tanarin awakens, it's disoriented but alive, though wary of Hadrian's intentions. As they move through the ship, Krim and Switch remain on high alert, fearing encounters with their own people. Tension escalates when they are confronted by Lieutenant Hannes and his men, who demand their surrender. Hadrian must find a way to navigate this new threat while keeping Tanarin safe. In Chapter 17, Hadrian and his team fight through a ship to reach the shuttle bay, evading resistance. Valka disables security while under fire, and Hadrian uses his shield to protect the group. In the hangar, he faces Captain Bassander Lin in a fierce sword fight, where Hadrian disarms Bassander, who is distracted by a stunner shot. Switch helps Hadrian to his feet, and they reach the shuttle. As they board, Hadrian is shot by Jadian soldiers, including his former captain Jinan. Despite the injuries, Hadrian and his team escape, leaving the battle behind. In Chapter 18, the Mistral approaches a massive extrasolarian station, and the crew prepares for potential contact. As they near the accretion disk of a blue sun, Ottavia commands the ship's operations with precision, while Carl, recovering from the freeze, reflects on the vastness of the universe. Carl checks on the other crew members, including the Cielcin, who is recovering in a holding cell. He discusses the station with Valka and Tanarin, learning more about their interactions with the Cielcin. Finally, Ottavia reveals the station's massive ring city, a mysterious structure the crew is about to dock with. In Chapter 19, Marlowe and his group arrive at March Station, a mysterious place filled with cybernetically altered people and a sprawling, rain-soaked city. They step into a world that feels both alien and familiar, with strange advertisements and unsettling sights. Krim reveals his familiarity with the extras, people enhanced by machines, and Marlowe contemplates his past decisions and the dangers ahead. The group discusses their options, with Marlowe considering using his name for leverage, while Switch and Saran remain suspicious of the decadence surrounding them. The search for Vorgassos continues, though Marlowe doubts its accessibility. In Chapter 20, Gibson and his companions visit Cento Biotechnic, a shady clinic that offers genetic enhancements. Gibson seeks help for a condition the Empire cannot cure. He encounters Dr. Yevgeny Cento, a geneticist who specializes in medical modifications, including the potential to extend life. However, Cento reveals that a true cure for death can only be found on Vorgassos, a mysterious planet controlled by the Exalted. The Exalted are said to possess the power to cheat death, though their location remains hidden. Gibson presses Cento for a lead, offering to pay for a name that could guide him to the traders who might know how to reach Vorgassos. In Chapter 21, Hadrian Marlowe and his group arrive at March Station's freight lift, where they seek passage to Vorgassos. They meet Monsieur Brevin, a merchant with dealings in the Exalted, who offers passage, but demands an exorbitant price of 100,000 marks. Brevin hints at offering alternative, more sinister options, including selling parts of Hadrian's body or genes, implying the immorality of such a trade. Hadrian refuses, resolute against being bought. The cost remains steep, leaving Hadrian and his companions in a tense negotiation, considering their dwindling funds and the possible cost of their mission. In Chapter 22, Hadrian reflects on his uneasy decision to provide a blood sample for Brevin, fearing the potential abuse of the sample. The crew discusses the next steps, including meeting Tanarin and preparing for a journey to Vorgassos. Tanarin, their only bargaining chip, is asked for a vial of blood to secure passage, but it resists, concerned about dishonor and being sold. Valka reassures Hadrian, though he remains troubled by his actions. Tanarin, revealing its status as a sacred figure to its people, reluctantly agrees to the blood draw on the condition that its people never learn of it. In Chapter 23, the crew of the Mistral follows a departure vector from Antonius Brevin, leaving March Station behind as they head toward a rendezvous outsystem. Tensions rise as questions about the mission's legitimacy emerge, with the crew suspecting a trap. As they approach the meeting point, nothing appears on the sensors, heightening suspicion. The crew is on high alert, and Captain Corvo prepares for potential conflict. When they finally open the airlock, a strange metallic being calling itself Nazareno enters. It reveals itself to be their pilot for the Enigma of Hours, unsettling the crew with its appearance and behavior. In Chapter 24, the crew of the Mistral faces tension as Nazareno, an Exalted with a mechanical body and strange mannerisms, assumes control of the ship. The crew is uneasy, particularly Captain Ottavia Corvo, who initially resists Nazareno's request for control, but eventually agrees. The Exalted takes the Mistral into an unexplained darkness, where they discover a massive city-like ship, the Enigma of Hours. Nazareno informs the crew that they are to follow strict rules while aboard. The crew is shocked by the revelation that their destination, Vorgassos, is only 3 weeks away, despite its vast distance. In Chapter 25, Hadrian and the crew aboard the Enigma await the release of Tanarin, a Cielcin, from the brig. Tensions run high as they discuss their uncertain situation, the potential dangers of dealing with Tanarin, and the looming threat of the Exalted. Hadrian reflects on his treasonous actions and the consequences he may face. As Tanarin emerges, its unsettling presence fills the room. The crew engages in conversation, revealing the Cielcin's unfamiliarity with human ships and their own cultural nuances. Despite the tension, Hadrian is drawn to the idea of sticking with Ottavia and the crew, finding camaraderie amidst uncertainty. In Chapter 26, Hadrian and Switch explore the Exalted ship, encountering strange beings and sights. They discuss the unfamiliar surroundings, and Hadrian spots an Irktani, a Cenobite from his childhood legends. He follows it and meets a man who offers to guide him to an oracle. The oracle, a dismembered and machine-like figure, claims to see time and speaks cryptically about the past and future. As Hadrian interacts with the oracle, it reveals disturbing truths, including the idea that his past is broken. Marco intervenes, angrily dismissing Hadrian, who is left confused and unsettled by the encounter. In Chapter 27, Valka spends the day on the Mistral, accessing the Enigma's datasphere to research the deeps, learning little beyond what Marco had told her. She remains silent about her unsettling encounter with Yari, the Oracle. When Valka visits her cabin, she suggests an outing, and they walk through a crowded concourse. Valka reveals her past as an orbital guard pilot, recounting a difficult decision involving terrorists which led her to resign. The two reflect on their choices, with Valka revealing her concerns about Hadrian's violent life. Their conversation deepens their bond, questioning what it means to be good. In Chapter 28, Marlowe and their crew arrive at the desolate planet Vorgossos, where they witness a dark, lifeless world under a dead star. As their ship drifts toward a towering black spire, they realize their ship's systems have been taken over, and they're being guided to an eerie docking station. Upon landing, the crew finds the place completely devoid of life, with no one to greet them. Tension rises as they explore, feeling watched. When the door shuts behind them, they're trapped and unable to communicate with Captain Corvo. The group prepares for what comes next, with Marlowe drawing a weapon. In Chapter 29, Hadrian and his group descend into the profane city. The journey is eerie, with ghostly lights and an unsettling atmosphere. They arrive at a massive dome city, its scale overwhelming, with streets inhabited by humans, homunculi, and chimeras. The city feels unnatural, quiet, and controlled. Hadrian seeks the Undying, the ruler of the city rumored to be immortal. They encounter a beggar, Shara, who warns them that the Undying knows why they are there. As the group navigates the city, they are surrounded by faceless guards, Psalms, and tensions rise. Hadrian must negotiate with the SOMs to continue his mission. In Chapter 30, Hadrian Marlowe wakes in an unfamiliar, luxurious yet decaying room. He meets Lord Kim Haesong, an elderly palatine, who explains that they are not in prison, but are waiting to meet the Undying. Hadrian learns that he has been brought to Vorgossos with other nobility, all awaiting an audience with the Undying's servant Yume, an android. The group, including a spice merchant and various lords, has been waiting months. Hadrian, curious about the Undying's rumored immortality, discusses the possibility of a new body or brain, revealing his own age of 35, which astonishes the others. In Chapter 31, Marlowe reflects on the treatment of prisoners by the legions, spending days in a bleak chamber with irregular food and no darkness. He encounters a golem named Yume, who refuses his request to send a message to his companions. Despite the machine's reassurances, Marlowe grows increasingly unsettled. Over the next week, he reads and contemplates his past actions, the war, and the mysterious Undying ruler Karn Sagara. He converses with an elderly woman who hints at the Undying's use of cloning to grant eternal life. Baron Song distracts Marlowe with a game of Ruocchio, furthering his disquiet. In Chapter 32, Hadrian Marlowe meets Karn Sagara, the Undying, in an ancient chamber. Despite Hadrian's persistent efforts to convince him of the importance of peace, Karn dismisses the value of human life, revealing his long experience and indifference to the war. Karn rejects any assistance, citing his long-standing trade relations with the Cielcin. When Hadrian presses further, Karn asks him to bring a Cielcin prisoner to hear its case. Hadrian, feeling mocked and defeated, is led away by the golem Yumi, aware that his mission has failed and his position is precarious. In Chapter 33, Hadrian's team reunites and they discuss their next steps after his release from captivity. They learn that Karn Sagara, the Undying, is willing to meet with Tanarin, but only if they retrieve the emissary from the Mistral. The group struggles with the strict security measures preventing communication, but Valka agrees to go to the Mistral while Hadrian stays behind. Tensions rise as Switch expresses his discomfort with their situation, questioning Hadrian's decision to remain. Before leaving, Valka unexpectedly embraces Hadrian, revealing the group's concern for him. The chapter ends with Hadrian alone, reflecting on the disturbing place they're in. In Chapter 34, Lord Marlowe is given a tour of Carnsagara's installation, a vast, ancient structure with a strange mix of concrete and high culture. Marlowe explores the corridors, discovering rich collections and an unexpectedly lush garden maintained by Carn. He reflects on the sorcery surrounding the place and its unsettling atmosphere. Despite his curiosity, he is eventually led back to his chambers, where he enjoys a meal and tries to distract himself from growing unease. As he sits alone, contemplating the past and future, he is suddenly interrupted by the touch of someone behind him. In Chapter 35, Marlowe encounters Naya, a homunculus sent by Carn. At first, Naya appears as a delicate, alluring figure, but Marlowe quickly becomes suspicious of her true nature. Naya's behavior seems driven by programming, and Marlowe recognizes an implant behind her ear, revealing she is a Essom, a construct with artificial influence. Tensions rise as she attempts to seduce him, but Marlowe resists despite his conflicted emotions. Carn intervenes, revealing Naya is merely one of his many creations and mocks Marlowe's discomfort. The chapter ends with Carn's unsettling presence looming as Marlowe grapples with his moral and personal boundaries. In Chapter 36, Marlowe struggles with memories of Naya and the oppressive atmosphere of Carnsagara's palace. He reflects on his situation, feeling like a pawn in Carn's game, caught between the lack of choice and his longing to return home. Despite his desire to escape, he remains, waiting for his friends to return. Yume, a golem, delivers food and conveys Carn's apology for the previous evening. Marlowe remains skeptical about the golem's honesty and questions Carn's surveillance methods. He longs for Tanarin's return, unsure of his place in Carn's complex world. In Chapter 37, Tanarin, Valka, and Yume meet Carnsagara, an ancient and powerful figure. Tanarin introduces itself to Carn, recounting its capture and the events leading up to their arrival at Vorgossos. The conversation shifts to the Cielcin's efforts to reclaim its people, with Carn expressing little concern for their lives, but showing interest in Tanarin. He implies that Tanarin's master will come for it, and that peace is not a priority. Despite Tanarin's insistence on returning to its master, Carn's tone remains dismissive. As tensions rise, Carn's Essoms prepare to separate the group, signaling a shift in the power dynamic. In Chapter 38, Valka and Hadrian reflect on their situation. Valka admits they may have been wrong about there being no danger, and the conversation shifts to their uncertain future, including concerns about Carn and the Mistral. They discuss communication difficulties and the possibility of finding a way out. Hadrian expresses fear over his past decisions, particularly regarding Jinan, while Valka offers a distraction by proposing they leave everything behind. They explore the idea that Carn may be using a Mercani AI to control the systems and contemplate using it to free the Mistral. Ultimately, they consider the risky path ahead. In Chapter 39, Valka and Hadrian continue exploring the labyrinth, encountering the beautiful Orchid Stair and its fairy dash lights. Hadrian reflects on a past story told to a friend, Kat. At the bottom of the stair, Valka detects something unusual and uses her technical skills to manipulate a system. They approach a door, where a mysterious silver eye from Carn appears, signaling something is amiss. After crushing the eye, they realize it wasn't Carn's interference, but something else. The chapter ends with them deciding to leave, uneasy about the unknown forces at play. In Chapter 40, Hadrian and Valka explore a hidden part of Vorgossos' palace, finding a warm teapot and 2 cups, suggesting recent activity. As they move deeper into the surreal garden and menagerie, they encounter strange creatures and unsettling statues. They discover a dormitory with signs and toys, indicating it once housed children. Hadrian experiences a powerful, inexplicable sensation when he hears a voice calling his name, which he recognizes from his dreams. He reveals to Valka that he's been having disturbing dreams, including one leading him to this location, and believes he knows where to go next. In Chapter 41, Hadrian and Valka navigate through a dark, eerie space filled with suspended children in glass pods. These children, who share features with Carnsagara, appear to be clones. As they move forward, they encounter a massive mechanical creature, the Exalted, who initially mistakes them for intruders. A fierce battle ensues, with Hadrian using his sword to damage the creature, while Valka provides cover with her gun. Amid the chaos, the Exalted becomes distracted by the fall of a child from the pods, giving Hadrian a brief opening to strike. They continue to fight, but Valka vanishes in the confusion. In Chapter 42, Karl encounters two children, Suzuha and Ren, who appear to be clones, and their guardian Calvert, a giant chimera. The children are suspicious of Karl and Valka's presence, but reveal they are loyal to their father, Karn Sagara. Karl seeks information about his friend, a Cenobite, but the children deny knowing anything. The Exalted, Calvert, hints at a group called the Brethren, which might have knowledge of Karl's companion. Karl and Valka agree to follow the children to find their friend, but Calvert insists on accompanying them. The chapter ends with a tense standoff as they proceed deeper into the installation. In Chapter 43, Hadrian and Valka encounter Karn Sagara beneath the dark waters of Karn Sagara. Father Calvert's betrayal is interrupted by Brethren, a monstrous AI, who intervenes and warns of a greater threat. Karn confronts them, angry over their actions, but Brethren crushes Karn's drones. Karn commands his undead army, the SOMs, to seize Hadrian and Valka. Despite their defiance, Brethren's telepathy compels Hadrian to surrender. As they are captured, Brethren cryptically warns of a looming price for survival, foreshadowing a dangerous and uncertain future. Hadrian begins to understand the full weight of his situation. In Chapter 44, Hadrian and Valka are imprisoned in a cold, dilapidated concrete room. Stripped of their weapons, they try to make sense of their situation. Hadrian reflects on his encounter with Brethren, the strange entity that claimed to be a daemon made of human sinew. They discuss its connection to the Mericani in the deeps, an ancient microorganism with mysterious powers. Hadrian discovers a white stone fragment from his vision of the cradle, which seems linked to Brethren's prophecy. Despite the strangeness and danger, Valka remains skeptical but resolute, reaffirming that they are still fighting. In Chapter 45, Karl and Valka endure their imprisonment, with Karl's mind unraveling from the isolation and the oppressive environment. Calvert, the Chimera, arrives to taunt them, revealing his gruesome enhancements and threatening both with horrific experiments. Karl briefly resists, landing a punch on Calvert, but is quickly overpowered. Calvert uses a syringe on Karl, drawing blood while threatening worse fates. After a brutal kick, Karl loses consciousness. When he wakes, Valka tends to him, revealing the effects of the procedure. They bond over their shared suffering, and Karl reflects on their bleak future, knowing Calvert's cruel plans for them. In Chapter 46, Hadrian struggles with the aftermath of the recent events, grappling with loss and despair. He and Valka are trapped in a cell, reflecting on their situation and the future. Hadrian questions his identity and purpose, torn between his past desire to be a scholiast and the reality of his current circumstances. Valka, with her implants and practical view, advises him to wait for the Cielcin, but Hadrian is uncertain about what comes next. They discuss their pasts, and Hadrian's internal conflict about freedom and choices surfaces as he realizes the weight of his previous decisions. In Chapter 47, Hadrian and Valka are summoned by a golem to Karn Sagara's pyramid. As they journey through crumbled ruins, Hadrian senses Brethren's presence, feeling its vast intelligence stretching across time and space. They arrive at Karn's throne room, where Karn the Undying speaks cryptically about a new development. Hadrian is introduced to an officer, Basander Lin, who presents himself with a formal military display, signaling Hadrian's loss of everything. The officer acknowledges Karn's role in returning fugitives, and the tension rises as Hadrian faces the weight of the situation. In Chapter 48, Marlowe and Valka are confronted by Basander Lin and Karn Sagara. Marlowe is shocked to see Basander alive and demands answers. Basander reveals the Imperial fleet, including the Obdurate, is on its way, and confirms an accord with Karn Sagara. Tension rises as Marlowe learns that the Cielcin are involved and the situation grows more complex. Marlowe presses Basander about his allies, but Basander dismisses his concerns. The scene shifts as Marlowe is restrained by legionnaires. Karn Sagara briefly stops their departure, ominously warning Marlowe that the prophecy he received was true. In Chapter 49, Hadrian Marlowe, imprisoned aboard the ISV Schiavona, faces a stark confrontation with Jinan, who brings a message from Knight Tribune Smythe. Despite her cold demeanor, Jinan reveals the truth. Hadrian's oldest friend Switch, betrayed him by sending his location to the Empire. Hadrian struggles with the realization of his two treasons, especially the betrayal of Jinan. The pain of their fractured relationship weighs on him as Jinan coldly declares him a traitor. She leaves him with the knowledge that Captain Basander Lin will soon arrive to decide his fate. In Chapter 50, Basander Lin interrogates Marlowe, who has been captured and chained to a table. Basander questions Marlowe about his involvement with Karn Sagara and the Marikani Daimon, warning of the dangerous political web they're caught in. Marlowe reveals that the daemon may have helped him communicate with Basander, and that Sagara's survival is linked to dark genetic practices. Basander accuses Marlowe of betraying his men and defying orders, while Marlowe defends his actions, claiming to have fulfilled his mission. In the end, Basander releases Marlowe, but warns him that his fate lies with Knight Tribune Smythe, not Basander. In Chapter 51, Hadrian arrives aboard the Demiurge, Karn Sagara's massive ship, where they are escorted through its intimidating, labyrinthine corridors. Hadrian reflects on their recent struggle and the overwhelming presence of Karn's power. Upon reaching a familiar area, Polino, Krim, and Ilex greet Hadrian with concern. They exchange brief updates on their situation, including Valka's return and the status of their mission. Overwhelmed by questions, Hadrian seeks rest, retreating to their quarters. There, they are haunted by a hologram of Jinan, grappling with the consequences of their actions and the betrayals they've faced. In Chapter 52, Hadrian Marlowe awakens to find Captain Ottavia Corvo in his cabin. They discuss the aftermath of their failed mission, including Karn Sagara's refusal to negotiate and the capture of Tanarin. Hadrian admits he and Valka were imprisoned for months, and Ottavia reveals the crew thought he was dead. Hadrian expresses concern about the situation with Basander Lin and the dangerous ship they are now on, suspecting a trap. They also discuss Switch's betrayal and its consequences, with Hadrian struggling between sorrow and regret. The chapter ends with Ottavia's quiet optimism, which Hadrian doesn't share. In Chapter 53, Hadrian fights Polino in the Mistral's gym, regaining a sense of control after his recent imprisonment. Siran and the others observe, commenting on his improved fighting. Amid the tension, Hadrian confronts Switch, who admits to calling Basander and betraying their group to save himself. Hadrian's anger boils over as he accuses Switch of putting everyone's lives at risk. Despite Switch's pleas for forgiveness, Hadrian can't trust him anymore, feeling deeply betrayed. The confrontation escalates, and Hadrian ultimately orders Switch to leave, severing their bond for good. Polino and the others stand by Hadrian, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. In Chapter 54, the Imperial shuttle lands, and Lord Marlowe watches from a distance, surrounded by guards. He observes the arrival of Knight Tribune Rain Smythe, who is accompanied by Sir William Crossflane and a large contingent of soldiers. They discuss the arrival of the Cielcin and preparations for the transfer of cargo. The conversation reveals the tense relationship between the Imperium and Karn Sagara, the ruler of Vorgassos, who seems to hold all the power. After a brief and unsettling meeting, Smythe leaves to consult with her crew. The chapter highlights the looming political tension and the influence of Karn. In Chapter 55, Captain Basander Lin confronts Smythe about Lord Marlowe's betrayal, questioning why he's not imprisoned for his actions. Smythe explains that Marlowe is needed for an alliance with the Cielcin, and his fate will be reconsidered after their meeting. Marlowe is tasked with assisting a translator, Tor Vero, and acknowledges his unusual interrogation methods. The conversation shifts to Karn Sagara, whose role in the Mistral's movements raises suspicions. Marlowe warns against underestimating Sagara, who may have betrayed them. Smythe asserts that the threat from the Cielcin demands unity, and Marlowe offers Basander a hand, which is refused. In Chapter 56, Marlowe follows Yume to a meeting with Karn Sagara aboard the Demiurge. There, they discuss the arrival of the Cielcin and their massive world ship. The Cielcin Herald, in a dramatic display, demands to speak with Karn, declaring their master's power. Tensions rise when Marlowe learns that Smythe and the Empire have traded 20,000 human slaves to Karn, a fact that disturbs him deeply. Karn manipulates the situation, ensuring the Cielcin's compliance while secretly preparing his own plans. Marlowe realizes the depth of the trade's implications and the true cost of their alliance. In Chapter 57, Marlowe and his group face the Cielcin in a tense meeting on the hangar bay. They witness the arrival of a massive Cielcin ship, and Prince Aranata appears, accompanied by his guards. The prince demands the return of his property, referencing a woman chained and mutilated by the Cielcin. Tensions rise as Marlowe speaks out of turn, suggesting a potential negotiation for peace. The group struggles with the Cielcin's dominance and their cruel treatment of prisoners. The situation becomes more dire as Aranata asserts his superiority, hinting at a grim future for any peace talks. In Chapter 58, Smythe reflects on the unsettling events involving the Cielcin, particularly their cruelty toward a slave girl, and expresses concern over their alliance with Sagara. The group discusses the ongoing negotiations with the Aieta and the need to present a united front despite differing views on the true cost of peace. Torvero, a Calcenterite scholiast, cautions Lord Marlowe to adhere to the official narrative and avoid sharing personal views. As tensions rise, Marlowe reflects on the complexity of his position, torn between his duty and the growing doubts about the Empire's actions. In Chapter 59, Hadrian reflects on the nature of individuality and community, pondering the impact of external influences on one's identity. He recalls a dreamlike encounter with Tor Gibson, who provides counsel on patience, duty, and the struggle inherent in life's journey. Despite the challenges, Gibson emphasizes the importance of perseverance, reminding Hadrian that hardship shapes the self. Hadrian is advised to focus on his aim, letting go of distractions and entanglements. As the conversation continues, Gibson stresses that life is a game, but one must play with purpose. Ultimately, Hadrian realizes that he must press forward with his mission, trusting in the path ahead. In Chapter 60, the column marches through a hall and enters a strange replicated garden on Karn Sagara's ship. They encounter Cielcin warriors and Prince Aranata, who discuss the ongoing conflict. The Cielcin's distrust of trade and submission becomes clear as they reject any offers that seem beneath them. Tanarin, a religious figure, hints at their underground origins and the effects of radiation on their people. The humans aim for peace, offering trade and dialogue. Despite tensions, they hope to negotiate a ceasefire. However, the meeting becomes increasingly strained as cultural misunderstandings intensify. In Chapter 61, Hadrian reflects on the strained peace talks with the Cielcin, struggling to understand their nature and the impossibility of true reciprocity. Despite their cultural differences, he remains committed to the negotiations. Exhausted and troubled by his visions of war and death, he seeks solace in a conversation with Valka, who challenges his doubts about the mission and offers comfort. Their dialogue deepens, revealing both personal struggles and a growing bond. In a moment of vulnerability, Hadrian admits his fears and uncertainty, and Valka reassures him with an unexpected kiss, signaling a shift in their relationship. In Chapter 62, the negotiation between Prince Aranata and the human delegation reaches a tense point. Rain Smythe uses the power of the Empire's vast resources to try to intimidate Aranata into submission, showing him the scope of the human territories. The Cielcin prince rejects the notion of neutrality and refuses to consider a peaceful arrangement, leading to escalating tension. When Aranata strikes a slave girl in frustration, Marlowe steps in to help her, further antagonizing the Cielcin. Despite threats, Marlowe stands his ground, refusing to apologize, asserting his power and setting the tone for future negotiations. In Chapter 63, Marlowe meets with Smythe to discuss a proposal, sending him as an apostle to the Cielcin, the Pale Aliens, to mediate and negotiate. Smythe reveals that their earlier actions have earned them respect, but the Cielcin may interpret a diplomatic envoy as a gift. Marlowe objects to being treated as a pawn, fearing the Pale would mistreat him, but Smythe insists the offer will be put forward. She suggests Varro as an advisor, and mentions the possibility of an audience with the Emperor. Marlowe reluctantly agrees, knowing refusing could have serious consequences. In Chapter 64, Knight Tribune Smythe offers the Cielcin leader, Prince Aranata, an emissary to strengthen relations. The Cielcin prince, however, demands Marlowe in exchange. Despite attempts at negotiation, Aranata refuses to give up Tanarin and asserts his ownership over the emissary. Smythe and her team struggle to comprehend the intricacies of the Cielcin culture and language, which complicates their negotiations. Aranata ultimately agrees to take Marlowe as a gift, but Smythe insists on sending guards with him for protection. Marlowe suggests involving Dr. Ondera, a xenologist, for insight, which Smythe agrees to after some resistance from the others. In Chapter 65, Hadrian reflects on his past conversations and walks alone in a garden, pondering the chaos of the Demiurge's design. He encounters Suzuha and Ren, who reveal unsettling truths about the Brethren, machines created by the Mercani that evolved into beings capable of creating terrifying weapons, even ones that could devour the stars. Suzua speaks of her father's control over these machines and hints at the looming danger to Vorgassos. Hadrian suggests its destruction, but Suzuha confidently declares her father's power. Yume, a golem, intervenes, and the children return to their father, leaving Hadrian to contemplate his future actions. In Chapter 66, Prince Aranata demands that Smythe's gift fight for the Cielcin and help conquer other clans, but Smythe clarifies that the gift's role is to broker peace. Tensions rise as the Cielcin prince expresses his desire for war, and Valka criticizes past imperial meddling. Suddenly, an intense red light signals the destruction of the Cielcin worldship by antimatter, which shakes everyone. Karn Sagara accuses Smythe of knowing about the attack, but she denies it. Basander Lin intervenes, revealing the attack was part of the plan, before fatally shooting Karn, ending his life. In Chapter 67, Prince Aranata reacts to the destruction of the Bahali Imnal Akara. Basander, following Hauptmann's orders, threatens Marlowe with a phase disruptor. Amid an escalating battle, Marlowe kills the Herald Oalakam and protects Nobuta, a frightened Cielcin child. He plans to return it to its father and end the conflict. Marlowe argues with Valka, insisting Nobuta is a hostage for leverage, and directs soldiers to escort the child to safety. Marlowe is determined to navigate the chaos and reach safety, though uncertainty and loss cloud his path with more dangers on the horizon. In Chapter 68, Hadrian, Valka, Basander, and the remaining soldiers retreat through the Demiurge as they face fierce Cielcin opposition. Many sacrifice themselves to protect the retreat. Hadrian reflects on his past disregard for soldiers, witnessing their heroism. As they navigate the ship, they encounter horrifying alien war machines, including the Kenoticon and Leviathans. They make their way to the Schiavona but are ambushed. Basander insists on staying to fight, but the situation grows dire. The group boards the ship, but an explosion kills many, including Sir William and Dame Rain Smythe, leaving Hadrian and others to flee amidst the flames. In Chapter 69, Marlowe and his team assess the aftermath of their mission. They discover that Karn Sagara had been controlling others remotely, and now several soldiers appear to be affected by this. Tensions rise as Basander Lin, now the ranking officer after the death of others, prepares to take charge. The team faces a dire situation with the Cielcin outside and no way to call for reinforcements. Basander decides to venture to the Mistral for help, gathering a small group of volunteers. As Basander begins his mission, Marlowe is left to grapple with his own uncertain role in this fragile moment of leadership. In Chapter 70, the ship is under siege, and the crew struggles to respond as blasts shake the vessel. Marlowe checks on Ren and Suzua, who are unresponsive due to their implants, and discusses the situation with Valka and Torvero. Tensions rise as Prince Aranata Otiolo demands the return of his child, Nobuta, and threatens the crew. Marlowe attempts to negotiate, offering an exchange of prisoners, but Aranata escalates by killing one of Marlowe's soldiers. As negotiations deteriorate, Marlowe kills Nobuta, forcing Aranata to retreat. The chapter ends with the crew grappling with the violence and its aftermath. In Chapter 71, Hadrian Marlowe faces mounting pressure as the Cielcin attempt to breach the Schiavona. After witnessing Nobuta Otiolo's death, Hadrian grapples with his emotions while strategizing with Valka and Commander Ciara. The crew faces a dire situation as drilling machines attempt to infiltrate the ship, and Hadrian proposes using floodlights and a coolant vent to create a smokescreen and impede the Cielcin's advance. As they prepare for battle, Hadrian rallies the soldiers with a passionate speech, inspiring them to fight back. Amidst chaos, he leads them in a desperate bid for survival, hoping for reinforcements. In Chapter 72, Hadrian fights desperately against the Cielcin and drones on the icy surface outside the Schiavona. Despite heavy losses, he leads a charge, nearly dying when a drone attaches itself to his helmet. Valka saves him, disabling the drone with her knowledge of their code. The Red Company arrives, turning the tide of battle as Cielcin forces retreat. Hadrian, relieved, reunites with Basander Lin and the others, though Prince Aranata is still missing. Hadrian insists Valka or he should handle talks with Karn's children, while Basander orders a pursuit to find the prince. In Chapter 73, Marlowe and his companions, Valka, Polino, and Krim, arrive at the Burning Garden, where Cielcin forces are in chaos. Marlowe reflects on Nobuta's death and the consequences for the Cielcin. After a failed ambush, they fight the Cielcin, with Marlowe suspecting Prince Aranata plans to destroy the ship. Confronting the prince, Marlowe struggles with guilt and the escalation of violence. Despite a brutal battle, Marlowe is fatally wounded when Aranata severs his arm and kills him with Marlowe's own sword. As Marlowe dies, he is consumed by darkness, reflecting on his life and loss. In Chapter 74, Marlowe, in a state of darkness, struggles with his sense of self after his death, feeling lost and detached. He begins to remember fragments of his life, including his name, and confronts a vision of himself dressed in ornate armor. A mysterious figure, his other self, points him toward a distant light, which turns out to be a piece of shell he had once seen in a vision. Marlowe is pulled back into the world of the living, now awake by a stream with his mutilated body. The quiet, embodied in Tor Gibson, reveals that Marlowe isn't finished yet, and he must return to existence. In Chapter 75, Valka and Polino fight against Prince Aranata's Skahari warriors, with Valka managing to wound one before her plasma weapon runs out. Aranata, still wielding Marlowe's sword, is poised to kill Valka, but Krim distracts him long enough for Marlowe to return and decapitate the prince. Valka, emotionally devastated, is overcome by grief and shock. The group, led by Basander and Polino, retreats toward the lakeside as the Essams awaken. In a moment of realization, Marlowe finds his missing arm in the water, confirming his resurrection. Amid the chaos, Karn Sagara, now the new Karn, commands the Essams to tear through the Cielcin forces, signaling a new, terrifying shift in the conflict. In Chapter 76, Hadrian awakens to find Ren and Suzuha in new forms, and Karn Sagara explains their regeneration. Hadrian learns his new arms are artificial, though biologically his, and reflects on the cost of his actions. Suspicion grows as Sagara's power and intentions unfold. Hadrian questions Sagara about the Quiet, a mysterious force that influences humanity across time. The Karns reveal their knowledge of the Quiet, and Hadrian recalls his near-death experience. The chapter ends with a conversation about immortality, death, and the unanswered mysteries of existence. In Chapter 77, the protagonist prepares to leave the Demiurge. Despite his left arm's infirmity, he manages to dress and equip himself, reflecting on his survival and the journey that brought him to this point. He discovers a fragment of eggshell in his saber-tash, which he believes might have been responsible for his return from death. As he contemplates his past trials, he finds Prince Aranata's ring, which feels like providence. The protagonist departs with Lieutenant Kurtz, feeling the weight of Karn Sagara's watchful presence. As the Demiurge vanishes into the night, he wonders about the paths they walk. In Chapter 78, Hadrian Marlowe meets Duke Titus Andrew Louis Hauptmann, first strategos of the Centauran legions, aboard the flagship Sieglinde. Hauptmann praises Marlowe for his role in the Cielcin conflict and his actions aboard the Demiurge. He reveals plans to recommend Marlowe for the Imperial Order of Merit and a knighthood. Marlowe, reflecting on his troubled feelings toward the strategos, is both disturbed and honored by the recognition. The meeting culminates with a holographic message from the Emperor, confirming Marlowe's knighthood and elevation to the Royal Victorian Knights. Marlowe is urged to attend Forum. In Chapter 79, Hadrian and Valka prepare to board the Schiavona, leaving the Mistral behind. Valka hesitates to join Hadrian, worried about her neural lace drawing attention on Forum, but she agrees to come with him after a heartfelt exchange. As they board, they are joined by their comrades, Polino, Ilara, Saran, Krim, and Ilex, among others. Hadrian confronts Switch, who apologizes for his role in the deaths of their friends. Hadrian, overwhelmed with anger and betrayal, refuses to forgive him, telling him that he is no longer his friend. Alone, Hadrian breaks down, mourning the losses of those close to him. In Chapter 80, Hadrian Marlowe, feeling the weight of his rebirth, seeks solace with Valka, who helps him process his grief. They discuss the mystery of his resurrection, the Quiet, and the shell fragment that may hold answers. Their intimate moment is interrupted by Basander Lin, who expresses awe and calls Hadrian's return a miracle. As the crowd gathers, the soldiers begin to chant half mortal, marking Hadrian's transformation. Though he is hailed as a hero, Hadrian feels uneasy, recognizing the heavy path he now walks. The chapter concludes with Hadrian accepting his rebirth, though uncertain of where it will lead.